really throws people, honestly. Kind of weird. Well, here, in case you want to get a hold of me later, I'll just pass some of these around for anybody who wants one. So who here isn't going to die? Now, we're not going to talk about, this isn't like a theological, kind of thing, right? Right? Okay, so it's that kind of got your attention, didn't it? Yeah, it's going to happen. All right. Who here likes to talk about death? Okay, good, cool, we got one. Mortuary school didn't work out, did it? So, no, the point is, though, that this is something that everybody is going to be looking at ahead, but there's a discomfort. And when folks think about planned giving, they think about, and I'm back here a little bit because I realize they think about death. They think about, this is talking about somebody's final demise, and that is not a comfortable thing. I mean, fundraising broadly is not comfortable for a lot of people, but that in particular. So what I really want to start out with for you is something to kind of get you through fundraising generally, but, and I think this will help for planned giving too. Anybody asks you, what is the secret formula for fundraising? I'm serious about that. This is what you tell me. 1-to-1 for 1. What am I talking about here? 1-to-1 for 1. So, now see, you're just sitting in front now. I'm gonna ask you a question. You haven't even touched your food. So, no, 1-to-1 for 1. If I was begging for something, right, it's 1-to-1, right, for me. But that's not what fundraising is. Fundraising is 1-to-1 for you. It's to help somebody else, right? 1-to-1, me to you for that other person. And that takes the discomfort of fundraising out of it for a lot of people, because you know what? You're not asking for you. And in planned giving in particular, you really aren't asking for you. You're asking for maybe future generations of whoever it is that you're working with, whatever your mission purpose is. So let's take a look here. We're going to talk about planned giving basics. And one of the issues that people face with planned giving are all those weird words, right? I mean, come on here, we've got lead trust, pooled income fund, flip trust. What could be a flip trust, right? Wills, bequests, charitable remainder, annuity trusts. Really? Okay. All obfuscation. Yeah, they're accurate technical words, right? But you don't have to be afraid of the words. You don't have to be afraid of the subject, right? The comfort is in something totally different, which I know each and every one of you can do. All right, so comes to my first point here. The most important thing about planned giving has nothing to do with the technical know-how. Our friends over here with these Univest badges, right? They can help you with the technical know-how. That's what they do. There, you call them up and say, hey, somebody's talking to me about a gift annuity. I need help, right? That's great, okay? And this isn't an advertisement for them. I mean, there's folks, I tell my students all the time, community foundations, banks that have foundation work like Univest does, other organizations that are good technicians. There's some really great, if you don't know, I want to say it used to be called PPP, Partnership for Philanthropic Planning. I think it's the National Council on Planned Giving now. Anyhow, have a great Philadelphia chapter. They meet quarterly at the Racket Club. It's not hugely expensive to join, and they do like these basic seminars before lunch. They have a really good lunch. They have a really good speaker, and there are lots of people there who can connect you into the technical stuff. No, the big thing is trust and relationships. Because one of the things you're going to find out, if you're working with somebody about their legacy, the end of life plans, right, is that it takes a while. It takes a while to build trust. This is, I will tell you, part of the reason why your friends in the business office, your accounting office, may not be thrilled with this. This might be why your trustees may not be thrilled with this, because you're not going to turn these gifts over quickly. Now, if lightning strikes, and it does more often than not, we were just talking about this, right? That you're going to get a bequest from somebody you had no idea about, right? But you just didn't know that relationship was building. Now, how do you build relationships? Well, obviously, right, it's a matter of going and talking to somebody one-to-one. But it's also about your annual fund mailings and things like that. Gina's going to talk a lot more about that. Okay, so that's number one. I have 4 rules I need you to remember when you're dealing with any kind of plan giving, anywhere, anytime. Number 1, you will never go wrong if you put the donor's priorities first. That is huge. Why? Why would that be something that's like number 1 on the list? Trust, yes, trust is a big part of that. And there's also getting to, I know I'm treading a bit on Gina's turf here on this, but there's another part too. Well, let me put it this way. We bought a house a couple of years ago, and I was going through, you know, the original owner, it's built in 1906. And I went through and found out, you know, all the past owners, and I was kind of doing some Google stuff on these folks just to, I don't know, get the history of the house. I found out that the woman who first owned our house, she died without heirs, had, cover your ears, had an attorney who took all her money at the end. So it's about putting your donor's priorities first and not having that headline. He went to jail, by the way. But not having that headline or even the hint of suspicion that your organization didn't do right by grandma. It's going to come get you. All right, number 2, donative intent. It's really important to remember that what we're talking about here are not investment vehicles. They look kind of like investment vehicles. You're going to see some of these, right? But no, it's not. Nobody should be going to you and saying, well, I have some money I need to invest. What are you going to do for me? The number 1 part is they have to want to donate that money first. And then get the benefit of whatever exchange is involved here. So that's really important, because that they want to, your mission is key. Now, I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but there's this group called the American Council on Gift Annuities. And I'll bet if you go to Project Home and you go to United Seminary and you were to say, hey, can I get a better deal on something or not, right? You guys should be saying, no, it's the same deal. Because the idea, and this is kind of we'll talk about this a little bit later, but the idea is that you're not competing on price. You're competing on mission. Somebody needs to connect with your mission first, not are you going to give them the better deal, give them more money back on something. Okay, donated intent. Number 3, you represent your organization. This is really important. I can tell you, I graduated, as was said, from St. Mary's University of Winona, Minnesota, in the very first ever, and I was in the very first class of the Master's Degree in Philanthropy and Development. And why did that program, why am I telling you this? Because that program existed because somebody didn't do this. There was a plan giving officer who got to know a woman who was giving her entire estate to the university. And he would go visit her once in a while, and honestly, she had no other family. He would bring her groceries, he would make sure the appointment to the doctor, you know where this is going, right? And ends up, he gets named in the will as well as the university. And the university says, hey, you were there for us. He says, oh no, I was taking care of her too. Well, it turns out the court sided with him. He got some of that money in the end. He didn't continue his employment with the university. Right? Maybe there was enough there in that exchange, who knows? But the point is, though, that you will become emotionally close to your donors. You'll have access to confidential information. You'll care for their needs. I was a pallbearer at Sid Rinsberg, God bless him. I was a pallbearer at his funeral. I visited him in the retirement community, the whole thing, right? And you will do this if you end up connecting with people on this, right? But you are always there on behalf of your organization. And you got to keep that in mind, because it's all about your mission, right? It's all about one-to-one for one. It's all about that one you're serving. Yes?
What if this person is also related to you? And so they would need you?
Well, that's different. It is different, and you may not be the best person to have that relationship on behalf of your organization. Or at least, I might recommend you bring in another person to also have that connection to talk about it, so that you, in effect, become the family member, not the gift officer. Yeah, I mean, obviously there are things like that, and that's important to remember, because a lot of small nonprofits tend to have family connections and all that. But broadly, got to keep this in mind. Thanks, that's a very good question. Can't say I've ever had that question involved doing this. All right, and number 4, never, ever, always, right? Never give advice on investments, accounting, and law, unless you are a financial advisor, an accountant, or a lawyer, right? And even then, are you their financial investment accountant or lawyer? No. Back to rule number 2, right? You represent your organization. Always make sure the donor, if possible, has their own counsel on these topics. And involve family members. If they have family members, you don't want to be in a position afterwards for them to say, oh, I'm sorry, you unduly influenced grandpa. That gift is a problem. I have seen that happen. I've seen that happen here in Philadelphia with some pretty major gifts. So you don't want to have that coming at you. Always, and now, and again, back to the recommending thing, right? If they say, well, then just give me a name of somebody. No, right? Send them to the Bar Association. Send them to the accounting, to a place where they can get broader advice. You don't pick the name for them. Again, you have that really close relationship, right? And it's tempting to say, oh, yeah, I know Bob, he'll be a great attorney for this. He does that work. Yeah, but now Bob is kind of like your person. Yeah.
What are your thoughts on having like a council of advisors? It's a list of experts that are associated with your nonprofit and in those fields, but not a single name or not.
I think that's better. I'd still rather send them to the broader association, but because there's still that little touch there. I don't know, maybe you have
No, I agree with that. I think you want to leave it as separate as possible.
Yeah, I defer to our attorney in the room here. I love councils though. I think they're really good, but their intent to be there shouldn't be necessarily pick up business, and they should understand that. And if they were contacted in that relationship, you would hope that they would be able to say, you know, I'm on that board, that may not be the best thing for me, go to that other organization. All right, so you got the 4 rules then. And these are really important to keep in mind you're doing any of this stuff. Okay, and then back to relationships. Having your job isn't necessarily to have a detailed working knowledge of this. And I say that because one of the mythologies about planned giving, and it comes back to comfort, but it also comes back to how the profession or the sub-profession kind of portrays itself, is that these are really technical things. You need to know everything about it. If you don't know everything about it, you shouldn't be doing it. Not really. You need to know the basics. And then you need to have advisors who you can call up for technical stuff. So again, you need to have that relationship, and if you ask, well, what about doing this? And they say, yeah, I might be interested, then you call up your technical person. So again, relationship is paramount because you can buy that. I just screwed that. They didn't tell me to put in the Univest ad. I put that. Okay. So let's talk about tools. Now, you're going to go through a few of these things, and I really want interaction here because I don't want anybody coming out of this room saying, oh, I didn't get that. Right? That's one of the things I run into my classes all the time is that somebody will nod their head, and then later on, it's clear they didn't get this. So don't be embarrassed. Nobody gets this stuff. So don't worry about it. All right. Turns out the easiest way to make a charitable gift in a plan giving method is not through your will. It's through what's called a designated beneficiary. And by the way, our friends at plangiving.com, they're right here in Valley Forge. Viken McCallion gave me all these little graphics. So a little plug for Viken. He does a good job with those things. But well, you can get out of your retirement account. This is relatively, so it used to be kind of some limitations, and that there would be every like 70 and a half, you would not be able to do this until, and Congress would have to renew it every year. It's now kind of permanently in the code that you can pull out from your retirement account, whether it's an IRA, 401k, 403b, 403b is like the nonprofit 401k, and move that money into to a nonprofit organization at your passing. And all it takes is filling out a form. You don't even, now, if you are married or if you have other, formerly married or whatever, you need to make sure you're doing the right thing. It'd be like changing your beneficiary in a life insurance policy, right? That you can't just do it unilaterally if you are not in a position to do that unilaterally. But given that, you can do it, you can do it all yourself, change the beneficiary. Sorry, no lawyers. But it's just, rewriting documents or anything. Now, it turns out if you have, say, $100,000 in cash in your bank at Univest, and you have $100,000 in a retirement account, which do you think would be better to give to your heirs, and which is better to give to the charity? What do you think? You didn't know there'd be an interactive part of this thing. What do you think? Which is better for your heirs and which is better for the charity?
The charity is better for the IRA.
Why is that?
Because of the tax benefit. The heirs would be taxed on it at a higher rate.
Right, because remember, all of this is pre-tax dollars. So it has to wash through the tax system and then go to your heirs. Whereas your bank account already's done that. That goes straight off. You don't have to pay additional taxes. So that's a really nice thing to know, is that if somebody comes to you and says, well, I want to give you this much money, ask them, do you have a retirement account? Because it might be better coming out of that as a designation than simply coming through their will to you that way. Because they get essentially their estate gets full credit out of the designation. The heirs don't have to, their heirs are going to get more money out of the cash. All right. But turns out this is not the most popular way to make a planned gift. What would that be? Yeah, bequest, a will, right? Okay, so here we are. Right. A bequest is the most popular way. This is, people, think about when people do bequests. Well, when are they in front of a lawyer? When are they working with things? So if anybody, by the way, if you've never read Transitions by a guy named William Bridges, very interesting book. He talks about kind of life stages and what people go through. And he doesn't say it overtly, but at those nodes of our lives is when we put ourselves in front of these people. So probably moving ahead of things like birth and like something in your teenage years in college, But when you buy a house, right? When you have children, right? When you are, maybe you buy your next house, if you're doing okay, and move up a bit. When you get toward retirement. Okay? So it's not just, oh, we're gonna talk to people about wills when they are, 65 years old, right? No. You wanna talk, because believe me, other people have talked to them about their wills by then. It's before then. So you wanna look at those things that you're talking about, and when people are doing it. So what is wills are typically changeable, right? This is important to know. However, not always. There's some states who allow irrevocable wills, and sometimes people get involved with that when you're doing a campaign, like for a building project, and they put it in their will to put that money in. You can lock it in sometimes. But this is important to remember because these are people, if you identify them, you will want to keep up with them. Ask yourself, do you have suggested bequest language? And that kind of gets into what Gina's going to be talking about, right? But it's, give them some guidance on how to do this. There are different ways that you can make, put money in an estate plan, right? So you're going to get 10% of my estate. You're going to get $100,000, right? A specific amount. Contingents are in effect if-then statements. If anybody's like a computer geek, and you say, well, if this happens, then that happens. If we're all wiped out in a plane crash, then the money goes to Project Home. You're like, so don't be cheery for a plane crash. But no, keep that in mind, right? That so those are contingent. Now, what is residue, and remainder? This is kind of interesting. I think it was American Red Cross who did this campaign. It's like, you can get, and this was years and years ago, we're happy to be at the end, was the tagline. Well, it turns out that when somebody has a fairly complicated estate, especially if they've worked overtime with something, like if you open up your estate plan, you start it when you bought your first house, and then they have kids, and then maybe they had a second home or whatever. Things got really complicated or whatever. This is the slush at the end that never got designated. And between the percentages and the direct, gifts and other things so sometimes that's big. Sometimes it's a couple bucks. But it's an entry point. And that's something you want to keep in mind, is that these last two here might be kind of starter bequest things that you can bring in, introduce somebody to being, well, listen, we don't have to, just make us a contingent beneficiary. And then later on they say, oh, okay, well, then they'll give you a percentage or a specific amount. Any thoughts, questions on any of this? This is pretty simple in some respects, right? But as was brought up to me earlier, a lot of times you don't know when people are doing this. And Gina's going to talk a little bit about, she's going to talk about marketing, but how people kind of engage in this is really important. This is really important. Bottom part here, that if you have a chance to influence the language, you want to make sure that it's as broad as possible. I mean, just throw an example out there. If you're a university and they say they want that money to go to the classical language department, and that's it. And by the time they pass away, there's no more classical language department. What do, right? Off to orphans court, get it changed, right? You have to go through a lot of stuff. It's going to cost you money. If you can get them to say, it goes to the classical language department or the closest intent to that as designated by the dean, the president, whatever, right? Huge. Really makes a big difference. Makes your life easier, makes their, it gets that intent carried out, and everybody is much happier. So, if you can do it, broad language really helps. Okay, bargain sale. Who would know in planned giving there could be bargains? Have we got a deal for you? No, but what this is that some property, something that has value, is provided to you. You get it assessed, and bless you, you get it assessed, and the money, and you are purchasing it at a better price than the total assessment. Now, key here is that you are not in the business to assess the value of anything. This comes down to, like, let's say somebody, my church, we're an old church building, and somebody gave us this really nice wood-burning stove that we put in the back of the sanctuary. It really it did a lot of things. Not only provide heat, it was kind of a homey atmosphere and all this, right? So the fellow who gave it said, oh, well, so give me a receipt for it. So thank you for the model ABC brand XYZ, of this stove. I was like, well, you didn't put a price on it. I paid $5,000 for this. Not my business to evaluate how much that is worth. What do you need to do? There's an IRS form for this. I think it's an 8283. You take it to the fire stove place. They look at it. They say, oh yeah, we sell these things for $4,999. Great. Yours is a little bit used, so we probably sell it for, $4,800, whatever. That's between him, the person who assesses it, and the IRS. You got nothing to do with it. So in the same way, when you get a piece of property evaluated, right, you are not in the business of saying how much that is worth. Now, you may take in your gift processing system whatever number that your donor comes up with on that IRS form to record it properly, right? And so then you have the deal and say, okay, so that stove was worth $5,000 because the fireplace store told you that, and you're selling it to us for $1,000. Here's the paperwork. Look at IRS publication 526. It'll tell you the right right thing to do, and everybody's happy. It's called a bargain sale. Now, typically this isn't done with wood stoves, right? This is done with property, with real estate. But the idea is the same, right? It's another kind of planned gift, and actually kind of planned gift you don't have to pass away to get. It's important to keep in mind, though, the main point here is that in no way are you ever in a position to evaluate the value of something. Thoughts, questions? Okay, let's move on. All right, life insurance. Oh, this is the greatest thing. We're going to come to your organization. I've always loved you. My buddy is a life insurance salesman. He's going to sell me this policy. I'm going to make payments. You're going to get $1 million when I pass away. Isn't that cool? All right. What is wrong with this scenario? Well, what's the first thing that might be an issue? What do you think? I mean, what kind of life insurance policy do you think I'm getting here? Term, whole, universal, what do you think? It's probably a term policy. And that's because term policies are like renting insurance. It's like renting a house. You only get it for as long as you make the payments, right? If you're in a house and you're renting a house, you're getting it for as long as you don't rent. You stop making the payments, out you go, right? You stop making the payments on a term policy, no more insurance. As opposed to a whole life policy, which is a little more akin to buying a house because you're paying into something over time, and eventually it has its own value. And it turns out in whole life that value spins off and makes the payments for you. But you have that, you have an asset there, okay? So typically if somebody does this, they're asking you, they're saying it's going to be a term life policy. So if it's a term life policy, what's problem number one? Yeah?
The term.
The term, okay, so first it's going to be like 20 years from now maybe, right? And is it renewable or anything? That's number one. What'd you say?
Who's gonna make the payments?
who's gonna make the payments, right? Right, I mean, you know, and related to that, can I see a hand over here? Okay, it's not just who's gonna make the payments, now you could make it so that they give you $25 and that's their charitable gift to you and then you make the payment, right? That happens, that's okay. But really, are you gonna keep up for the next 20 years, $25 a month to make that payment? Probably not. After about, I'll give it at tops 5 years. Probably like 2 years or 3. Somebody's just gonna get tired of it, some circumstance changes in their life. Suddenly they're like, I don't wanna do this. Maybe they decide that you're not their favorite charity anymore. Gone. Okay? So that's not a great use of insurance here. There are better uses of insurance. Number one, you will find over time that people will have gotten whole life policies because, you know, who knows? They bought one of these Gerber life things, or their parents did. Or that somebody did a, they had it when they had children, or, you know, for some reason somebody had a whole life policy, or they bought this policy, right? And now they are well beyond, you know, their kids are out and on their own. It's a minor amount in the broader scheme of things, and they just say, you know what, we don't need this anymore, why don't you have it? That's great, it's just like a designation. Somebody's just gonna give you that, right? They fill out the paperwork, it goes to you, it's done. Now, you can keep the policy if you want. Typically, a nonprofit would cash that policy out, get the cash value, put it in your endowment or whatever, you know, however you and the donor work that out. That's good. So that is a good use of this, of life insurance, or at least a better use. If somebody comes to you and says, hey, I got a life insurance policy, you want to be looking at these as opposed to a term policy. Now, it turns out, well, anybody ever take Benadryl? I'm serious. Okay, I had the privilege in the 1990s to know a fellow named George Revachol. George invented Benadryl. Really, and honestly, really nice guy. Worked for Park Davis at the time in Detroit. And he was giving, I want to say, $1 million to the University of Cincinnati. Now, he was concerned about his children, though, because, you know, George did pretty well for himself, right? But he didn't do, as the inventor of Benadryl, you would think that he would have done really well for himself. Well, Park Davis did really well for themselves as a drug company, not necessarily George. But he wanted to make sure his kids got money out of his estate as well. So he did what's called a wealth replacement policy. And you don't have to know that much about this, except to know that if he were to have given that $1 million through his estate, it would have been taxed, right? But he was able to get a term life policy that was able to replace the amount that the children would have gotten out of the estate. So it wouldn't have been like $1 million, it would have been like 400,000 or 600,000 or something, right? And since life insurance isn't taxed, that would have made up for that. So that's possible. That's a good use of a life insurance policy, to do something that's going to be a wealth replacement vehicle, as opposed to, I'm going to make these payments for the next 20 years. George, I think he lived like 5 years later after that. And so it was a high price policy, but it was less than the amount he was going to get. The whole thing worked. It was really good. But this is the kind of thing you want to look for, these whole life policies. And, you know, people, you'd be surprised, are sitting in the closet someplace or in a file cabinet, and folks haven't a clue that they could use that to help your organization. All right, thoughts on this? Please ask questions. Okay, let's move ahead. Okay, now we're going to talk about stepping up the game, because this is really the break point. All that other stuff is kind of the easy stuff that you can do to, that really doesn't require a lot of work on your part. You can accept, you know, encourage people to give you money in their will and accept that money, not a problem. You can encourage people to do designations and accept that money, not a problem. With a little bit of gymnastics, you can do a bargain sale. And life insurance is largely like a designation. And then, or you ask people, you know, can you, do you have a whole life policy, and they give that to you, and so you're good, right? So all of that is pretty easy to work through. Here, I'm not saying it's gonna be overly complicated, but I'm saying that this is where things change at this line right here. So, yeah, like I say, any organization can do, right? You can just be passive, and I talked a little bit here, sorry. Melody? Melody. About, you know, are you a order taker, right? Do things just kind of fall your way, or do you go out and seek them, right? But either way, you can do this. You can just be passive and just receive, right? And the states, and this is an important part, the states don't have any requirements on you except for that evaluation of what something is worth for you to engage in anything we talked about before. At this point now, the things we're going to talk about, the states look at as insurance. And so the game is upped when it comes to how long you've been in business and what kind of assets you have. Now that's kind of the bad news in some respects. However, the good news, and again I point to my friends at Univest, but you can do this with a community foundation as well, is that there are organizations who will in effect serve as your surrogate in this process. So if you're a young organization, or if you are a organization with not a lot of assets, right, or you don't want to get into this kind of stuff, right, you can go to these third-party organizations like Univest Foundation and others who will act like that for you and then give you the benefit of that relationship with the donor. So you don't have to, you can do some of these things, you can still do these things. Okay. These broadly are called life income agreements. We're going to get into the specific names, but in the big picture, that's what they're called. So the process is that a substantial gift is made, right, to, here's your donor, and here's your organization, right? And a big gift is made to the organization. And the organization pays back a little gift consistently over time back to the donor. Well, actually, it's not a gift. It's actually income. I misstated that. So big gift to the organization, little bit back on a consistent basis to the donor. Now, why would anybody do this? Well, there's some reasons. Your donor wants to make a gift. They love you. You're the best thing that they've ever heard of. But honestly, I can't afford to lose the income. You have bills to pay. I have to make sure that, my cat gets fed or whatever. We laugh, right? But we're talking about people a lot of times, and you'll find that your biggest plain giving donors, and Gina will touch on this, aren't the people who are the ones you think are going to be the biggest plain giving donor types. So, yeah, the donor can get a better income than some fixed instruments. Any Univest people, tell me, what is the regular statement savings rate right now?
0.05.
Yeah, 0.05, right. These will do better than 0.05. And I know I said they're not investment vehicles, right? But come on, you can do better than 0.05. So that's important. You are actually helping increase somebody's income, especially, and I'll show you an example of somebody, early in my career I saw this done where we were able to actually make a lot of money for somebody who was paying a lot of money on something before. It was great. We were able to help them. You can convert costly investments into income. Well, that's, okay, so I'll tell you this now. So that, it was a piece of land that they were paying taxes on, and that they had to maintain. They gave it to the school. The school was able to, they got the deduction for the land. They stopped paying the taxes. They didn't have the maintenance. So not only was it an asset that wasn't earning for them, but it was an asset that was costing them. Well, we flipped the cost over so that it didn't cost them, and it actually gave them money back by the end of this. So instead of putting out, say, $5,000 a year, they were making $10,000 a year. You can do that for people with these things. And tax advantages, because a lot of these things are funded through, somebody might have a stock they've held forever. When I worked in Cincinnati, you know, you'd be shocked at the value at which people will get Procter & Gamble stock. When P&G was like this small unknown company that was just selling ivory soap. And they would have this stuff, and then they would turn around and do a life income agreement with it, and they would avoid the capital gains on it. They would be able to convert something that was just sitting there into something that was a bigger asset. It really made a big difference for them. Now, why not? Because for you, right, the payout, there is a risk sometimes that the payout is going to be bigger than whatever somebody put into it. The baseline of these things is typically that if somebody gives this much, you know, these $4 signs here, right? In the end, you're going to end up with 2 of them. Because over time, these $2 signs are going to get dripped out back to the person. Now, that's if you die on time. This is all about actuarial tables, right? If you die on time, then the charity gets, you know, the $2 signs here. If you live longer, then you might just get 1. If you live really long, you may not get any, or you might be in negative $ sign territory. That's a risk. And your CFOs and friends like that aren't happy with that risk. So you just got to keep that in mind. You may not have the administrative infrastructure to make timely payments. So if you decide to handle these yourself, you don't want to get the call from Tilly saying, "Where's my check?" So a lot of times that's why you work with these third parties who can do this for you if you don't have that administrative infrastructure. And or the donor says, "Hey, I just need the cash." And so it may not work for you. All right, let's get into a little more specifics here. The most basic form of these is called a charitable gift annuity. And that is pretty much what I outlined here, right? What we showed before, right? Here's your donor, here's your organization, here's your money going in, right? And here's your little bit of money coming back out. That's a charitable gift annuity. And by the way, plan giving people love letters. You're going to hear CGA, you're going to hear CRAT. Don't worry about it. This is a CGA, if you want to sound like, But you see here, right, gift of property, right, fixed income deduction, the remainder comes to us. It turns out that you are legally allowed to spend, I say that, the corpus straight off. This is a contract between you and the donor. You get the money, you are contracted now to give that donor for the rest of their life, either quarterly, annual, semi-annual, annual payments, however you arrange this with them, right? Whatever that amount of money is. You could theoretically go spend that. Take the money, go put it in your biggest project, whatever you want to do. Most don't, it's not advised. But since it's a contract, it is possible. I'm not recommending it, I'm just telling you that possibility exists. Now, the nice thing about these things too, is that it can be based on 1 life or 2. So the actuaries have this little fancy little table that says, oh, well, this is a 2-life annuity or a 1-life annuity or whatever, right? You can defer payments, so you can set one of these things up and say, I'm not going to take the payment until 10 years from now when I need it. And people will ladder these up so that they'll, in 10 years, 12 years, 14 years, or whatever, they'll start taking the income from these things. They're actually reasonably flexible. And, but, like I said before, gotta be timely in the payments, and the risk is, if you guys go out, their payments stop. Thus, why it's considered insurance, thus why the states have thresholds that you need to meet for these things. All right, and here's where I said American Council on Gift Annuities. I give you, on your sheet, you'll see the URL there. Because they set the standards for the rate at which people get paid back on based on your age and number of annuitants and all that. That's why that typically folks, usually what happens is that people don't cap, they won't give bonuses, like an organization won't say, well, we're gonna pay you more, but they will cap the top out and say that, well, listen, I don't care if you're 100 years old, we're only gonna pay at the 85 rate. So that actually reduces the payment down. But the point is though, the competition should be based on your mission, not on how much you're gonna give somebody. That's why there's that standard there, and it's been upheld in court. This isn't collusion, this isn't, antitrust behavior. Courts say it's okay to do. So, everybody kind of gets this concept here? Okay. Now we're gonna step this up a bit. I put these two in the same slide because largely they're the same thing. The concept is the same. So you have a donor, you have your organization, but then there's this trust that gets set up. And so the donor gives to the trust, right? The trust pays back the donor, and then when the donor dies, the trust kicks that money to the organization. So notice the difference here. This is not now a direct relationship between the two. There's this third party called the trust, which has its own employer identification number set up in it. Now, why would you do this versus that? Well, actually, there's some good reasons. First of all, you can do this in, like I said, two ways here. The charitable remainder unit trust, as it turns out, has a fixed, well, really simplifying it, unit trusts pay back a variable amount over time. So this month, because you're always you're taking the value of the trust here, and you're saying that, okay, we're gonna take 5% out of that trust all the time. Well, if the trust is 100,000 when you start, and then it becomes 90, and then it goes up to 110, right, that number's gonna change every year. An annuity trust means it's a fixed payment every year on the amount, which means that this trust gets really big and really small really quickly. But you always get the same amount of money out of it all the time. Think of it, it's kind of like a balloon, and you want to take variable amounts of the balloon, the air out while you're putting air into it, or do you want to take the same amount of air all the time, then the balloon's going to get like this? Because when the balloon's small, even if you're taking the same amount of air out, you're going to make that balloon get small. So, why do this right? Because you can put multiple charities in that trust. They can be the beneficiary. You can add to the trust. You can change the beneficiaries. You can have a third party manage a trust, not one of the charities. You can add a fixed asset. So somebody can put their house in the trust, it's called a flip trust, and then when they sell the house, when they want to get the money from the trust, that's flipping, right? And so in effect you defer that out. And it doesn't rely on the solvency of the nonprofit. So your nonprofit can go away, this money can go to a different nonprofit. However, they could, right, they're more expensive because you're setting up a third entity here. They're more complex. There's some IRS involvement in a trust because that third entity has its own tax returns. You have, most places will put minimum amounts on all these things, but the minimums are typically higher because it just costs more to run these. And like I said, the trust could run out of money because if you're doing, like, you're taking that same amount all the time and the trust is getting smaller and smaller because for some reason the market isn't doing well, it isn't growing the trust, you could drain the trust. And it's happened, like, 10 years ago, this is a problem. So there's some risk involved here. But much more sophisticated, but bigger, people get more out of it. It's much more flexible. I'm seeing faces here that are like, huh? I'm happy to clarify, really, I am. Yeah?
We've gotten some charitable remainder trust where the donor actually had maybe children or other relatives that were the recipients of income for their life, and then when they die, we get the principal. That's the same thing, but just a different.
It's akin to this, yes. Very. Now, actually, I was at Moravian College for an interim stint as alumni director there, and they got money from a Civil War veteran, and we're talking in the early 2000s. Well, it was a trust set up that the grandchildren of this fella who was he was a veteran after the war. He set up an ice business, you know, at the time, right, delivering ice and all this, and made a huge amount of money up in Allentown. And his last granddaughter passed away in the early 2000s. And $3 million to Moravian, 3 to this what became Kids Peace, and 3 to St. Luke's, I want to say. And but yeah, that kind of thing. So yeah. All right. Other kind of planned gifts here, and I've just kind of covered the biggies that you might run into, but think of a pooled income fund as one of those trusts, except at the end, right, or except the trust is divided into a pie, and you can get a part of that pie, and somebody else has another part, and somebody else has another part. Right? You don't find those as often anymore, but they exist. You should know about it. And this is just another kind of one of those trusts we were talking about. And then a charitable lead trust is like this really weird thing where, so you transfer back in the meltdown. This was like, you could really do a lot with these things then, because the money would go to, how does this work? The money transfers into the trust. And in effect, you get, as a nonprofit, the income, the fixed yearly payments out of the trust for a period of time. So you're in effect renting the money. And then when, at a certain period, the trust liquidates, and the remainder goes to the next generation in the family. So it avoids the taxation by transferring money across generations. Now, if you think of this, if you put in, like, General Electric back then was pretty high before the meltdown, and then it hit the bottom. Well, GE was always worth more than whatever that low was. So if you put the low amount of GE in here, and then that money would, the income from that would come off, right? By the time it recovered, maybe it would go to the children. And you would avoid all that capital gains in that transfer. You're probably not going to see that, but it exists. And if somebody says, oh, charitable lead trust, you at least have a concept of what it's about. Again, you're probably not going to see pooled income fund. They're not as popular as they used to be, but you'll have heard the words. You kind of got a broad concept of it. I think, yeah, and then keep in mind that there are programs that run these things. Crescendo, PG Calc, they've been around since the 80s. I've actually visited them back in Boston. They were the same house they were as they were in 1989, I think, on Mount Albert Street. They do all these calculations for you, so you don't have to do the calculations. And I know your friends at Univest have those programs as well to do these calculations. So you know, don't feel overwhelmed. Well, I don't know how to do the math. You don't have to do the math. Computers do the math, and they've been doing the math since the 1980s. So this isn't anything like brand new. And that's what I got. Thoughts, questions?